the reason that we've invited you to join us today is because we want to try and reassure parents out there that just because the clocks are going to be going back, it's not going to be the end of the world. And hopefully, hopefully you're going to, reassure everybody that that's the case.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining us.
No problem.
So shall we just get started then with the fact that, it's not very far away now, and is there anything that parents can do in advance to prepare for the clock change this Sunday?
So it really depends on what type of baby you have, how old they are, those kind of things. My advice with the clock change is always don't stress, and I probably would be tempted to say don't do anything, because when we become new parents, we get obsessed and bogged down with routines. We dread the clock change when actually it's not something we need to be too worried about. An hour's difference in the time can obviously disturb our circadian rhythm, but not for long. So if you've got a baby who is clockwork, that naps at the same time, goes to bed at the same time, then yes, try and shift things either 15 minutes at a time starting from today or tomorrow, or you can even kind of start the day before and just start shifting everything 30 minutes later. But the way I've always approached it, and the way I tell clients to approach it, is to just do nothing. They will catch up. It may be that the day after the clock's changed, they are up an hour earlier. And then all you need to do on that following day is just try and shift everything back to get back to that normal bedtime. It's really important to note as well that if you've got like a baby that's under 6 months, they don't have a fully established circadian rhythm yet. So it's likely to not affect them in the same way it would affect, say, a toddler or a preschool child. Also a baby of under 6 months is also napping quite a lot during the day, so it's quite easy to kind of tweak things and move things forward. But it's definitely, if you are going to start shifting things back, think about shifting meals as well. And if it's too stressful, don't do it. Just wait and see, because often we can worry so much about this, and actually the only thing that'll happen is they'll wake slightly earlier the day after, and then you'll get back on track over the next 48 hours.
Okay, well, that was going to be the next question about, will baby naturally not want to go to bed an hour earlier or wake an hour later? Is that what we should expect to happen?
Yeah, potentially. And again, it all depends on how old your child is, whether they've got that fully established circadian rhythm and body clock. The thing is with babies is that it's because they are relieving sleep pressure during the day. And this is what a lot of parents kind of maybe don't know, is that sleep is driven by sleep pressure during the day, and naps have a totally different function than nighttime sleep. So we can play around with that sleep pressure during the day to try and kind of encourage a later bedtime. If you have got a child that's, for example, going to bed at 7, waking at 7, napping at 12, waking up at 2, going to bed at 7, then yes, that's a clockwork child that maybe would benefit from things moving backwards. And we can expect an earlier rise. That's just how it is. And we may even wake up earlier too. So yeah, my bottom line advice would be to just try not to stress. And that's my whole kind of ethos around sleep and children and parenting, is that why worry about something that we cannot control? And why try and change our child to fit something that potentially is just going to be more stressful to try and achieve?
Well, I think that's exactly why I wanted you to speak to us, because I think a lot of us do stress about that kind of thing, and we always want to have this element of control going on with like our children, especially when it comes to sleep, because we obviously want to make sure that we get our sleep as well as parents. But it's interesting what you say about the daytime naps and how we can play around with those maybe. Like, do you have any specific tips on, maybe more for the person that's got more of a clockwork child, as you call it, to try and push those a little bit earlier or later in the day?
Yeah, so if you could play around, especially if you work off wake windows for your baby or child, you could just start experimenting with moving that wake window 15 minutes later, so that sleep pressure builds a little bit more, and that over the course of a few days, by the time it gets to Sunday, they're actually napping and going to bed an hour later anyway. But if you're finding that difficult and perhaps you can't stretch them that extra 15 minutes, don't stress about it. Just take your child's cues and kind of go with the flow a little bit.
Okay. So moving on, thinking about sleep on a more generic level,
Mm.
what would the ideal bedtime look like in your opinion?
So bedtime is, again, bedtime is driven by that pressure to sleep, but also our body clock and the production of things like melatonin, and our lovely sleepy hormones. And the way we kind of introduce a bedtime routine to a child and the way we kind of make that a positive thing for a child to experience is by giving them cues to sleep. So we can, there's lots of I've had lots of conversations with parents who kind of get really bogged down about having to do a bath because that's part of the routine, when actually it doesn't matter too much if bath isn't part of your bedtime routine. It's more about those little social cues you're giving to your baby before they fall asleep. So things like singing the same song, reading a story, cuddling, and then feeding them to sleep in a dark room or cuddling them to sleep in a dark room. Yes, you can introduce white noise if you want to, but it's not necessary. It's not a must. And the perfect bedtime routine is simply a short sequence of things you can do and have your baby or child be involved with that's nice and calming and relaxing.
Lovely. So, what about obviously there are times that a baby or toddler might not sleep as well as they usually do because they might be unwell or they might be going through some kind of sleep regression. What would you say to anyone struggling with this at the moment?
I think it's really important to understand that sleep goes through peaks and troughs in those first couple of years, and it isn't linear. Things affect children's brains, learning new skills, learning new words, eating new foods. These all have an impact on our sleep architecture and the way that works. So there will be times when your child's poorly or teething or going through some kind of regression or progression where they've learned new skills, is that their brain prioritizes different stages of sleep and they want to wake up and practice those things. And it's hard work. If you've got a very, very good sleeper and you have these little blips and you can kind of pinpoint it to things like they've learned to clap, they've learned to walk, they've learned to say something, you can kind of rest assured that this is kind of a temporary blip. And the best thing to do to get through them is to just make sure that you're calling on people for support, you're going out, you're getting lots of vitamin D, exposing yourself to that natural sunlight, you and your baby, because it's very beneficial. Eating the right food, drinking lots of water, and going to bed early yourself if you're going through a tricky sleep stage. There is nothing, there's no cheat sheet, there's no hacks that will make a baby tease less or will not learn a skill that won't affect their sleep. It's about just, I think the more knowledge we have about why something is bad or why something is potentially more difficult is the best way to kind of view it, because then we know kind of, okay, well, I know why that's happening and we do just need to kind of ride it out. And it's just so normal for sleep to kind of be going like this for the first couple of years. And that doesn't mean you have to leave your baby to cry to get them to self-settle. There's, like I said, there's no kind of instant fix or a hack that will make their sleep better during those phases. It's just about giving them lots of time to practice, and going with the flow. Try and keep to your routine as much as you can. Thinking about shortening wake windows. If your child has learned something new, their brain is going 10 to the dozen and maybe tired quicker. And it's those kinds of things we can kind of be thinking about. And I think the more knowledge we have as parents as to why things are happening, the better we feel about it. And our babies are fine no matter what. It's us as their parents that struggle with these things. So to know how to approach it and know that it's normal is often the best thing to kind of come to terms with and to acknowledge.
I think that's great advice and for the phases, and as you say, just making sure that you're armed with the knowledge of what might be going on with them. What about anybody who is really trying to establish just some kind of routine? And maybe they might be above 6 months and they're just trying to get something established.
Mm-hmm.
What would your advice be to those?
Again, to take it slowly, keep your expectations quite low. We cannot pre-program other human beings to kind of fit around the schedule that we kind of download off the internet or we see on Instagram. A really good way of kind of establishing a routine is to kind of have a set wake up time. And that can be really, really good and a good anchor to your day and your baby's circadian rhythm and body clock. The only problem with that advice, though, is if that you've been up so much throughout the night, your baby crashes to sleep at 5 o'clock, you don't then necessarily want to wake them at 6 to start your day. So it's just keeping an open mind and being flexible about your routine. But definitely a set wake up time is a good way to start to get some kind of rhythm to your day. People like wake windows, and they can be really useful for some people. You just have to really kind of remember that they're not evidence-based, and they're more anecdotal based, kind of off a wide range of people working with a wide range of children and kind of coming to that conclusion. So more about sleepy cues and catching them. That might be eye rubbing, it might be some babies kind of get like little red eyebrows, yawning, not being interested in playing, yawning, staring off into the distance, back arching and things like that. They can all be signs that it's now time for a nap. And you'll find that things just start to get easier the less daytime sleep your child needs, or the less sleep in a 24-hour period your child needs. Because when that happens and they're kind of on one nap, for example, you kind of know where that's going to sit. And personally, for me as a parent, that's when I started to find things a bit easier with sleep. When they dropped to that one nap, I kind of knew when it was going to happen. They can communicate a lot more, those kinds of things. But my advice to people that are really wanting that routine, if you're kind of very routine driven as an adult, is to just start kind of having a set wake up time and then start trying for a nap at a similar time. But don't get too stressed about that not going to plan, because things will change daily. But I definitely was that parent that needed structure and needed routine, and wake windows did actually work really well for me, but they don't work for everybody.
Okay, I think that's really good advice. And I think this leads nicely into the next question, which is about for anybody who might be struggling with just real unsettled sleep, they just feel like there's just something that's not quite right with their baby, their toddler, waking up frequently, that kind of thing. Is there any kind of checklist that they can almost run through just to see that there's not anything really obvious that it's not working?
Absolutely. And that's my biggest kind of passion, is finding out why a baby's unsettled and helping them sleep, and educating parents about feeding and about tongue tie and about reflux and about all of these things. And kind of society's view of an unsettled baby is that it's kind of purple crying, it's colic, they'll grow out of it, you'll need to wean them early, you just need to sleep train, all of these things. So for parents who are struggling with children that are waking very, very frequently, it might not necessarily be refluxy now, but maybe they had a period of that during the early days, is to really think about the root cause of that. And there is always a cause for unsettled behaviour. So I actually have a frequent night waking webinar on my website, and it goes through all of the things that could potentially be impacting on an unsettled baby. Perhaps there are people watching this now whose children are waking hourly and have always woken hourly, or maybe hate their car seat, they struggle to lie on their back, they always bring their knees up, they're very, very unsettled. That's a really good place to start. And generally when you're dealing with a child that is quite unsettled, starting with feeding is the best thing to do, because if our little ones are upset, we need to think about how they're feeding, whether they're taking in lots of air, whether they're struggling with what they're eating and feeding wise. So that frequent night waking kind of runs through all the different reasons why your child might be unsettled. And I also have a free red flags PDF that people can download that just runs through kind of mouth breathing, snoring, all of these things, what the possible causes might be and who you can go to for help. But kind of when we're looking at sleep holistically, it's vital that we're not just focusing on how is this child falling asleep, because that's irrelevant. And it's actually more about kind of what is happening during the day that is making them unhappy and uncomfortable.
So when a client comes to you then for this advice, do you ask them to prepare things in advance for you to then review together?
Yeah, so it all depends on what you need help with and what kind of package you booked, but as standard, I will always ask for at least a 5-day sleep diary. And from that diary, I'm looking at, okay, is this unsettled behaviour or frequent night waking due to sleep hygiene? Is this baby awake for a long period of time and therefore got a lot of cortisol that we kind of need to manage with extra naps? The sleep diary also tells me if parents have got sleep hygiene absolutely bang on, but this child's waking hourly, I'm instantly thinking, okay, now I need to see this child feed. Are their lips pinching at the side? Are they dribbling milk? Are they clicking? Does the mother who's breastfeeding have constant mastitis, or just feel like feeding is a bit of a challenge? We will start there and it will kind of go from there. So yes, I kind of look at everything as a whole, whether a child's had antibiotics at birth, whether they were kind of breech, ventouse or forceps delivery, would they perhaps benefit from osteopathy treatment to release tension in their body? Tension in a baby's body can present in so many ways, kind of shoulders up here, a double chin, clenched fists, kind of very stiff, very windy type of babies. So it's that frequent night waking webinar really addresses all of those issues and tells people kind of where to go from there.
And I'm surprised by all those facts you just mentioned, that they could have a potential impact on sleep. So I'm sure, yeah, that's news to everybody that's listening as well. It's really interesting.
And the thing we've got to remember is that poor sleep is a symptom of something. And if we can find out what that is, then we can help the sleep. But we unfortunately live in a society where we plaster things, we put a band-aid on things to help them. So we prescribe medication, which is in some cases needed, or we'll say that we're all looking for like a quick fix, right? Aren't we? Like, that's what we want. We want to be told what to do and our child will sleep. But unfortunately, it's not that simple. But it can be with the right help. Simple things like changing a bottle teat, changing feeding position, having a thorough oral assessment, releasing tension in the mouth, going to see an osteopath. All of these things kind of build up this bigger picture, because ultimately a comfortable baby is a baby that will sleep well.
Well, I wish I'd have found you when I had a newborn baby. I know he didn't sleep properly, or in my opinion, properly until he was 16 months old, and it just felt relentless. Like when you're in it and you feel like you just are exhausted every day, it's awful. So I think it's amazing to have people like you on hand just to look from an outsider's perspective as well into what might be going on.
Exactly. And like a client the other day said to me, and I'm going to use this analogy going forward, she was like, I feel like we're in a maze and you're helping us get out of the maze. And I was like, that's a really good way of describing my business.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you can kind of not really think about kind of what it is you do for parents. And it is very much kind of, you put everything on me and I'll untangle it, and then we'll get to a better sleep. And that is what I needed 7 years ago. And then again, 3 years ago, I have been through a lot of kind of birth trauma and health trauma with my children, so I really understand it. Really massive advocate for maternal mental health, and like that's kind of such an important thing to consider, is that mental health when you're sleep deprived is obviously worse. And instead of the focus being on, okay, well then we must sleep train to help this mother, actually, why is this happening, and can we actually do things now for this family that's going to then enable this child to grow up healthier and happier, and have kind of a good relationship with sleep.
Amazing. We'll just go quickly back to the clock change then on Sunday. Yeah. So obviously with the clocks going backwards rather than forwards, daylight isn't quite as much of a problem at bedtime as it would be in like the summer when we do the clock change then. But just thinking about creating the right environment for a settled night's sleep, what would your top tips be on that?
So a dark room is always preferable. It doesn't mean that you cannot kind of give eye contact and those things. Eye contact before sleep is really important, and that's something that we hear a lot. Do not look at your baby when you're getting them to sleep, just in case they kind of think, oh, she's looking at me and I'll wake up. So eye contact and kind of lots of one-on-one connection time before sleep, and then helping your child fall asleep in a dark room that's nice and cool, the right temperature, which is hard to do in the summer. Obviously, now we're getting into the winter months, it's a bit easier. There are so many different things that can influence a child's sleep, but ultimately, if their environment is consistent, that's when kind of those kind of signals to our baby's brains because it's all about what they expect and what we're kind of trying to tell them we expect of them. And so that bedtime routine with little kind of social cues, and then that dark room, nice cool environment. I love a sleeping bag with legs. Love a sleeping bag with legs. They are brilliant. Yeah, just keeping an eye on temperature. It's not rocket science when it comes to kind of that perfect environment, and we can fall into like this trap of, okay, my little one's not sleeping well, so I must buy a white noise machine, or I must buy a glowing toy that sits in their crib. Maybe they're scared of the dark. And yeah, they can be brilliant kind of comfort for children, but it's really important to remember that children don't necessarily get afraid of the dark until around 2.5 years of age, when their imagination really comes to play. So don't be worried about kind of a really dark room. That's the environment that's then going to help melatonin production and signal the brain to sleep. And that happens in the dark.
Okay, that's good. So despite all of your advice, I'm sure that we still have a few parents that feel a bit worried about this clock change and what it's got in store for them this coming Sunday. And for anybody who might have joined a bit later, like, can you please just maybe share a couple of mantras that we should all keep in mind when maybe things do become a bit unsettled as a result of it?
My favourite one is, do nothing. I can't control this. I cannot control the clock change, therefore do nothing. Just going to go with the flow. If that frightens the living daylights out of you to go with the flow, then start today. Just nudge everything back by 15 minutes if you can. But if your child naps at 9 o'clock one day, 11 o'clock the next day, or will nap in the cot one day, or wants to nap on you one day, that's absolutely fine. And actually trying to work that out and move things backwards is actually going to be quite stressful. So please don't worry about this. You cannot control it. You can probably expect an early rise on Monday, and then things will sort themselves out. I promise you.
Perfect. Thank you so much.